You know, it was said, it was reputed that Mark Twain once said of Kentucky that when I die, I want to be in Kentucky because everything there happens 20 years after it happens everywhere else. Now, that's no longer true, and he never actually said that. And certainly it's not true of this governor and this administration. You know, isn't it refreshing that someone running for office would provide a blueprint for what they'd like to accomplish? The audacity. And then actually follow that up with checking those boxes. And doing that in less than 2 years, save one or two things we'd like to accomplish in my side of the House in justice. He also had the audacity to make a phone call to someone he'd never met and of the opposite political party. That's me, to talk about heading the Justice and Public Safety Cabinet. So if nothing else illustrates this space that we all know is intensely nonpartisan, this governor is evidence of that. And that's why I'm proud to work for him. Just in a few short months, really, not even going on 2 years, we've embarked upon a felony expungement, fair chance hiring or ban the box as you know it, a reentry bill that focuses on everything we've talked about today, and a governor who's actually begun reviewing applications for pardons because, as he said to me and others, if it's the right time to do it, that time is now, not when I'm walking out of office. And that's the kind of bold leadership he's provided, and that's the kind of bold leadership we should challenge ourselves with in this space. We've talked a little bit about the opioid crisis, and I know that's not the focus, but certainly, given that it drives so much of our populations and it's such a scourge, really a pandemic, we're the first state in the country behind his leadership. He dug his heels in to make certain we followed the CDC's recommendation to become the first state to limit the prescription of those pills for acute pain to 3 days. That was not an easy lift. So while treatment is important, it's also important to narrow the size of that funnel at the top, and that's what we're doing in Kentucky. I could go on, but let me just say again that I'm proud to work for Governor Matt Bevin, and when I asked him to be here, his schedule simply did not look like it would allow it, but he made it work. And so he's going to enjoy a conversation with Carrie Johnson, a reporter and justice correspondent for National Public Radio. Many of you have heard of Carrie. Again, she covers a wide variety of stories and justice issues, law enforcement, legal affairs, for NPR's flagship programs, you all know, the Morning Edition and All Things Considered, as well as the newscasts at npr.org. So enough of me, more of Governor Matt Bevin and Carrie Johnson, and what I hope you'll find to be an enlightening and enthralling conversation. Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's great to be here with you, Governor. And I want to start off by asking this basic question. You delivered most of a formal address to overhauling the criminal justice system in your state. Polling earlier this year suggests something like 82% of the people in Kentucky want to see change in the justice system. What motivated you? Was it the will of the voters? Was it a personal experience you had?
Yeah, I mean, it's less, let me just say even before we thank you all for being here, and I mean it sincerely. I was happy to come here because I'm grateful for the fact that people like you from your respective states take this seriously. This is something we were talking about, and this will get to the heart of the answer to your question. What frustrates me, this is the first political job I've ever had, and what frustrates me as a civilian, or has historically frustrated me, is that we talk about this ad nauseum, this and any number of other things. And we have blue ribbon panels, and we have 5-year studies, and we talk and talk and talk, and nothing gets done. And I believe in redemption. I believe in second chances, and I look at the history of this nation, and literally, we have entire states that began as penal colonies. We won't name them because people feel picked on when you say that, but you know who you are. But the reality is, it's true. And you think about this, so many of the people who first came here for a second chance. And so for me, why would we not want to make this a priority? And again, talk is cheap. At a certain point, it's time for action. And so it is personal to me in that regard. Every one of us, everyone in this room, certainly everyone in America is probably only 1 degree of separation away from this issue. I know that I am, And so to that end, why would I not care about this? And I'm grateful that the people of Kentucky have afforded me an opportunity to be in a position to bring this forward. And as was noted by Secretary Tilley, it's not a political issue. It really affects people regardless of their political ideology. But it's one that affects millions of Americans who find themselves incarcerated, a couple million folks, 95% of whom are going to get out. We ought to have a better game plan for how we cut down on that recidivism. So.
Let's talk a little about your game plan. You went at this rather systematically. You appointed a panel of people to sit down and talk about things. What kinds of people were on that panel? What was your mandate to them?
Sure. I mean, my methodology was this. Even before that actual thing, when I first was elected, I came into a very divided government. We'd had a House that had been controlled by a party that I was not a member of for 96 straight years. So uninterrupted for almost a century, and that wasn't projected to change anytime in the foreseeable future. So it was going to be clear that anything that had to be done was going to have to be a method of finding like-mindedness among people. This is certainly a topic where that was possible, and so from the beginning we did things like pass an expungement bill. And that was something I did with a divided House and Senate, is passed the first comprehensive expungement bill in the history of Kentucky, and one of the more comprehensive in the country. Then also, banning the box, or kind of a fair hiring practice, which we implemented statewide in Kentucky, and publicly called on the private sector to do the same thing. And yet, these two things in and of themselves were not going to address all the things that you all have been talking about for days and have yet tomorrow as well to talk about. And that is, what are all of the voices? In this CJPAC, as it was called, the Criminal Justice Policy Assessment Council. Everything has an acronym in government. And the CJPAC is what it was referred to as. It was intended literally to bring voices from every single constituency. So we brought people from law enforcement, from the prosecutorial side, from the judge side, from the faith-based community, from the victims' rights side, from the, fill in the blank, all different corners of this state. And I wanted their voices. I wanted every one of them to weigh in, and we broke our needs down into about a half a dozen, 7 different specific categories, to include things like recidivism and things like the opioid problem and the fact that that's contributing as it is. And saying to this group of people, what can we do to address this? Not assuming that any one individual or even this group of 24 had all the answers, but just as you all are wrestling with in the course of these couple of days, what are best practices that are out there? And so that was the purpose behind this, and it was remarkably effective on many fronts. People got to have their voices heard and appreciated the fact that they were sitting across the table with people who wouldn't necessarily have expected to be sitting across the table from them. Number 2, or B, mixing letters and numbers on you, that's not good. But B, it also produced very good, robust dialogue because it was disparate voices. And good policy ideas came forward, the bulk of which came into something that's known as Senate Bill 120, which was passed, that we can talk about perhaps. But not everything they came up with ultimately passed into law. Some things didn't even make it into the bill itself, but many did. Some had to be pulled back. For those of you, how many in this room are in the legislature in your respective states? Okay, quite so a decent number of you. You know exactly why what first comes up as the right idea doesn't always get passed into policy. And so there was some debate between both those for and against certain things. But we got a very good bill passed in the end.
Most of it focuses, as far as I understand, on the back end, the reentry part, as opposed to the front end?
That is correct. There's a fair amount of the back end, but also not the back end. It's the what are we doing with people while they're incarcerated part of it. Because here's the thing, and you all know this, I'm preaching to the choir, I'm the dumbest guy in the room on this topic, I would bet. And yet here's the thing, of the many people, millions who have been or are or will be incarcerated, 95% of them or more are going to get out. I mean, that's the reality. The vast majority of them are going to get out and are getting out on a regular basis. And yet nationally we have these recidivism rates that are north of 40%, no matter what metric you use, and in some jurisdictions and for certain populations even higher than that. Why is it so high? What are we failing on? And so one of the things that this bill addresses is bringing in programs that talk about how can we not just simply remove people for periods of time, which their actions have deservedly been met with that punishment, fair enough. But simply removing and not thinking about either rehabilitating and or reassimilating, that's the problem. And so this bill is really looking at how do we rehabilitate while we have them and then reassimilate them on the back end as well. The removal part, we have that down pretty well. We just do in America. Not perfectly, but decently well. In rehabilitating and reassimilating. So programs like Justice to Journeyman.
Explain that one. That's
Yeah,
an
I mean,
interesting one.
so you think about this. If you were a journeyman, an electrician, a plumber, what have you, any of you who happen to have ever been, licensed as such or know someone who has, appreciate what that involves. And being a journeyman is a skill set that would afford you the ability to go anywhere in America and get a job like that. If you are a journeyman on any number of skilled trades, you would get a job like that. Well, one of the things that it requires to become a journeyman, and the reason it is so valuable is because you don't have one group who invents the interpretation for it and another group. It means something. It is a certain methodology of attainment of skills that actually means something and is transferable from any state to any state. Well, one of the things that is required is 540 hours of classroom time. Where do you have a more literally captive audience than people in prison? Yeah. Where they have all the time in the world to spend on these types of training. And so that then if you knock out the classroom time, then when you get out into the real world, outside of the prison walls, you have a chance to start doing the training and actual on-the-job skill development that comes secondary to that. And so we also brought in programs. So this Justice to Journeyman program is something that we are putting into we have 7 pilots going right now, 3 of them in our general population prison system for adults and 4 in our juvenile detention centers. And they cover things like everything from carpentry to electrical work to plumbing to, some of the more technical skills associated with kind of IT, but wiring related things. And these are just skills that frankly are highly in demand, that study after study has been shown, and some of you perhaps were the generators of these studies, that have shown people who in 3 years after being released, if in a 3-year period, have worked for even 12 months in a row during that 3-year period, their recidivism rate is literally a third of the exact same cohort who have not worked for 12 months during that 3-year period. That's a remarkable statistic and a pretty resounding cry for coming up with ways to help people be engaged. Because at the end of the day, this is more than anything else. And back to your first question, why do I care about this? Human dignity is, so much of what has ailed the world on any number of fronts has been the result of people having a loss of dignity and a voice. And people have different ideas of how people have lost their voice, or whether they really are being subjugated, or whether they really have been marginalized. But the truth be told, people have, throughout history, been all those things. And it is this resulting loss of a voice and of dignity and of control over their own lives that ultimately robs people of humanity. And people who've been robbed of their humanity make inhumane decisions. We shouldn't be surprised at that. They make inhumane decisions about themselves, in their own personal habits, about the ways in which they do or don't care for those close to them, their communities, their families, etc. And so I do think we have an obligation as a society, as civilized folks, to look out for those who need help. In all these things, these training programs, this Justice to Journeyman program, also breaking down barriers that exist in all of our states to varying degrees on what a prisoner is allowed to do in terms of work. Historically, we've had the ability they can go and do menial tasks at times, and nothing wrong with menial tasks. I mean, I spent the first half of my life doing menial tasks. To pay my way through life and through school and what have you, and that's good. But if that's it, and you can only do it for the government, for the state, for pennies on the dollar of what it's worth, have we really helped people? What about the idea of engaging with business where people can make a decent wage and thereby pay off restitution, pay for their actual living accommodations, at least partially, and get the dignity associated with saving money and earning money and then having something, a nest egg, that when they are released, and a skill set. So working with people in the private sector to bring them inside the prison walls and to bring prisoners outside, not compromising safety or security, but in ways that we can thoughtfully start to pilot programs and then scale those to ensure that we really are preparing people for the millions of unfilled jobs that exist.
Speaking of unfilled jobs, Governor, you wear on your lapel a little pin, if people can see it, with some scissors on it, talking about cutting red tape. Tell these folks what you've done with respect to licensing and cutting some red tape with respect to incarcerated people and formerly incarcerated people.
And this obviously goes across cuts on this subject, but so many others, is I pledged shortly after being elected that we were going to review the 4,700 regulations in our state and the 130-some thousand rules that those are comprised of, and that we would cut 30% of all the red tape in 3 years. Didn't say we're just going to chop with an axe and willy-nilly. Thoughtfully, over 3 years, going to read every single bill, or every single statute, I should say, every single regulation, and we're going to look for those that can be eliminated and those that can be consolidated and those that can be updated. And in the course of that, a whole lot affect public safety and justice. And indeed, this cabinet under Secretary Tilley has taken this on full steam, and they've cut, significantly, and we still have a long way to go, and we've modernized. But among those, simple things. One that's not directly related, but you used to have to be licensed to braid hair in Kentucky. And I would bet that even in some of your states, that may still be a requirement. Why? Here's what I know. Even I question some of the need to license certain other things. Who keeps going back to a bad barber? Really? Anybody? I know, but it's terrible, but it's so cheap. Who does that? And the difference, nobody. Does the government need to be involved in everything? I would beg to differ. But we used to the heart of your question, we used to have a requirement that precluded anybody with a felony record from ever being licensed for anything in Kentucky. Also crazy, and I'll bet you we weren't the last state in America that did this. I would encourage you to change this in your states. And so one of the things that we did as part of this Senate Bill 120 is remove that mandate that precluded a person from being eligible to be considered for a license. They're not guaranteed to get the license, but they're no longer precluded from applying to be a barber or an electrician or an HVAC employee or whatever the case might be. So again, common sense things that are actually good for the individual and good for society at the same time.
Okay, Governor, what else is on your list of things to do? There are things across the country that are getting a lot of debate now in courthouses, in state houses, in Washington, God forbid, where we are. Bail reform, sentencing reform. What is next on your agenda in this space?
Boy, there's a lot, and it's interesting for those who worked here, and I see, a couple, one of our legislators is here who was party to the discussions and the negotiations that went on. This was a Senate bill, but the House, of course, weighed in on it. It affects a whole lot of folks, like the FOP obviously has a strong voice, prosecutors have a strong voice, et cetera. And so some things did not make their way out the pipeline. I hesitate to single out a single thing or two, but one I will mention because it was very controversial and it was removed, but I think it should not have been, and I think we ultimately are going to have to address this. And again, I mention it because I'm willing to bet it applies to the bulk of your states as well. And that is the threshold at which felony theft, for example, applies. In our state, it's still $500. It's never been, it was set at that many years ago, and it's been kind of locked in. And there were some that would argue that that's darn right, you steal something, but there's not the opportunity for discretion that perhaps would exist. That perhaps it should be, 3 or even 4 times higher than that. And if there is no reoccurrence of it within a 30-day period or 60-day period or whatever the case might be, the exact specifics can be determined, then in fact it would not be considered a Class D felony. These are the kind of things that I think are worthy of discussion because sometimes people just plain straight up screw up. Should they be held accountable? Yes, they should. Should they be held responsible for restitution and the penance associated with whatever it is they violated? Of course they should. But that said, does that then need to be, a scarlet letter to be borne by them for the rest of their life and prohibiting them from being reassimilated back into a society that desperately needs a workforce comprised of every able-bodied man and woman that exists? So that's one example of the types of things that I think we could do a better job of, and I think in general America needs to do a better job on.
So you were one, I think, of 2 governors who came to D.C. in September to meet at the White House with respect to all of these issues on a national or a federal scale. What did you hear there? How confident are you that this Congress, this U.S. Congress, is actually going to do something in the next year?
Boy, those are 2 very, very different questions you just asked me. I was right on board and fired up until you added that last little question. You could ask me that question as it relates to my confidence in this Congress to get much of anything done. But I'm in D.C. and I may not get out of here if I go down that path. So here's what I'll say. You and I talked briefly in the other room even before we came in here as we were being queued up and mic'd up. That really the idea that these solutions, let me back up. How confident I am that this administration is serious about this? Remarkably confident. Very high. How was that meeting? It was excellent. The people that were there included, I'm betting, some that are probably in this room. I know for a fact my secretary was one of them, but others in this room perhaps representing folks in the nonprofit, for-profit, employers, and people in the criminal justice, foundation world. A number of great voices were represented. And we spent hours going around a table with people sharing ideas and best practices and encouraging one another. But this wasn't being done for lip service. It wasn't being done for fluff. This is an administration that recognizes very, very seriously how critical this is that we get these folks engaged. And so I'm very confident that there is an impetus from the White House and from this administration to doing something. My confidence in Congress's ability to do something, I would love to say it's high. It's not high, which isn't to say that there aren't people that are serious about this. I mean, honestly, even one of our own senators, Senator Paul, has been a leading voice on this front. Mike Lee from Utah has been a very strong and thoughtful proponent and leader on this front. And there are others as well in the House and the Senate in both parties. But there's 2 good voices in the Senate who have tried to do things on this front. But these things get stonewalled. So back to the point I was going to make before I came back to the question, the laboratories of democracy that we talked about are the states. It's what our founders understood. It's what federalism in its purest form was intended to be. This idea that somehow a one-size-fits-all is going to be masterminded up here in Washington by any group of people, 535 or some lesser group, it doesn't. The point is this. It's not likely that the very solutions that are best for each of your respective states are going to be coming in an omnibus package from Washington, D.C. Just not likely. That's just the sad reality of it. And for the gentleman who agrees with me, thank you, sir. But it just isn't. And so to that end, what is the solution? I don't even know this guy. I'm just telling you. I did give him $20, but I don't know him. But in all seriousness, what is the solution? Then the solution is exactly what you all are working on, and what is going to happen within each of your respective states, and what Kentucky's doing. And frankly, what lessons can we learn from those that preceded us, the Texases and the Georgias and the Oklahomas and other states that are doing good things on this front, and others as well? How can we learn from one another? And that's what I would encourage you to do, is go away and don't accept the fact that what you will find, sadly, is as much pushback. I'm guessing there's plenty of R's and D's in this room. I found some of my greatest opposition coming from people within my own party, because we're the people that are tough on crime and we're the people that are tight with law enforcement. And all that is true. But I don't think that is compromised by being thoughtful and smart and using common sense. I don't think we compromise those other things that we need to do. And so to that end, I think these solutions are going to come from the bottom up of necessity.
All right, I've taken your measure. I get that the action is coming from the states, and I want to ask you a personal question about your state. In July, you issued your first pardons, including some people who were not just convicted of check kiting or paper offenses, but some of these people were convicted of drug offenses and other crimes. How closely and carefully did you examine their records? Why pardon now? How often do you expect to use that major power of mercy in the future?
In reverse order, perhaps, of the questions, I intend to use it as often as necessary. This is, as I said earlier, this is the first political job I've ever had. I don't make any decisions based on what's politically expedient. I'm not trying to build a political career. I believe that people should be citizen legislators for finite periods of time. I don't care what role you happen to be in. And to that end, you should do what is the right thing to do to serve the people that elected you. Rolling back in terms of the questions, I mean, why now? Because these things need to be done, but how thoughtfully? Very thoughtfully. And it's interesting because when I first started to do it, it got a lot of publicity, and I've done it, since then, and I continue to. I read every one of these files very, very thoughtfully. What I do, and I would again encourage any of you that are in a position to influence your governors to do the same thing, to encourage you to think this way. Every single application for pardon, first of all, I encourage anybody who would want to be pardoned to apply. Why not? I mean, if you want to be pardoned, apply to be pardoned. Then I encourage I broke all the attorneys that work in my administration in every one of my cabinets. And we took an entire day and we broke all of these. There were certain criteria, there's certain things I'm just not going to pardon somebody for. One example, if I list too many examples, but I'm telling you, sexual crimes against children, I'm not going to pardon you, period. That's 100% in my estimation, volitional on your part, and I'm not going to pardon a person for something like that. That's just one thing. But that said, I laid out clearly those things that I would consider and those things that I would not. I then got every single attorney. We had dozens of attorneys and good, thoughtful people, and we spent an entire day, and we broke all of these that were complete applications into stacks, and everybody got a stack. And they all went through them after I spent, about 30 minutes with them, giving them generally what I was looking for, and then certain, parameters, and then answering any questions they had. And then they spent the day just going through these. And so they went through all those to meet my criteria. Those that they believed would, they put in a stack. And I read every single one of them. If they think it meets my criteria based on a thoughtful consideration of it, I go through them. And it is a lot of stuff, and it takes a lot of my time. But to me, I think it's the greatest responsibility in some measure, almost. That what greater gift do I as a governor, or does a president, in the case of the United States, have than the ability to pardon a person? I mean, that's an extraordinary power, and it should be taken seriously. And the idea that it's done at the end because it's politically safe and you might not get in trouble, if I've not been thoughtful enough along the way to pardon a person who's not worthy of it, that's a potential risk, understood. But shame on me if I was flippant about it. And what bothers me is what I've seen historically is people sometimes are flippant about it. And people get pardoned who shouldn't get pardoned. And people get pardoned for political reasons. I'm looking for the people who don't have a voice. I'm looking for people that aren't politically connected. It isn't to say that the others may not be worthy of consideration as well, but the purpose of it is to provide an opportunity for a person who wouldn't otherwise be given that chance. I recently pardoned a young man who's not a young man anymore. He's in his 30s, who killed someone. That was not an easy decision. I don't always meet with these people. I did meet with this individual. I was very torn on this. But in the end, I ultimately decided to pardon him, and it was the right thing to do, and I'm completely confident in that. I will continue to do this, and I don't worry about the consequences of it because the method to that is as it should be, I believe.
One last question for you, and we'll see if the room has a question before we close. Some of the people in this crowd may work for governors and state houses that aren't thinking about these issues the way that you are. What advice do you have for people who want to make this a top agenda item in their state? How do you get the attention of a governor who's a very busy person?
The question I would ask each of you is, how badly do you want this? Really, how bad do you want it? If you have the ear of a governor or of key people in legislation, in the legislatures, or policy folks within your state who are able to garner attention for this? I mean, some of you, I hope you're not just in a job where it's just sort of your job to talk about this. I hope you wanted enough to work yourself right out of a job because you're so successful at it. My advice to you would be to want it that badly, to want it so badly that you would be willing to not have a job because your job wouldn't be needed. If you want it that badly, if you pick, and also another thing, if you chase 2 rabbits, you won't catch either one of them. If you chase 50 rabbits, you'll catch nothing, not even your breath, but you'll always have an excuse for getting nothing done. That's what happens with blue ribbon panels and 5-year studies. A lot of work, a lot of paper that just collects dust in people's offices, and nothing gets done. And so what I would encourage you to do is find the 1 or 2 things. And take them one at a time. If it's 2 things, divide and conquer. Don't chase them both yourself. But pick one thing that will most transform your state. What's one thing that each of your respective states and each of your respective governors could and should do in your estimation? And just beyond that, like with a sense of urgency, the likes of which maybe you've never had. That's what I would encourage you to do. And that's how things change. I think it was Margaret Mead who noted, and I hope I'm not misattributing this, because a lot of times quotes are made, that maybe didn't apply to the person who actually said them. But, I think she said something to the effect that, the world is, and I'm butchering it, but something to the effect that, the people who think that one person can't change the world, that's the only thing that's ever changed the world. I mean, you think about this. It's one individual, one voice, one issue, one topic at one moment in time. In Winston Churchill noted that history will call upon everybody at some point in time. That the world has always changed. There's always been these seminal moments. And on criminal justice in your respective states, there's going to be a moment in time, and there's going to be a person, and it might be you. And he said, shame on the individual who finds themselves at that critical moment in time that's either unprepared or unwilling to take up the challenge. And I would encourage you, be prepared like a laser. Be focused like a laser. Be bold like a lion. Another thing that, as long as I'm mentioning Churchill, speak of the lion, he was called the Lion of England. And he was not exactly a humble guy. He wasn't known for that. And yet, interestingly, that was one moniker that it bugged him a little bit. I'm sure he liked it on the one hand, but he would often try to dampen people's use of that. And he once said very, I think appropriately, he said, it's not me that's the lion. He said, the people of England were the lion. He said, but history called upon me to deliver the roar. And I'm saying that each of you in this room has the capacity to deliver the roar to your respective governor, to your respective legislatures, to the people of your respective states. Be that kind of bold. Deliver the roar, because America needs it. And the very people that we're wrestling with how to rehabilitate and reassimilate need it. In a big way. In a big way.
We have time for... I think we have time for maybe one question from the crowd. There's a gentleman with a microphone.
Hi, Governor. Craig Drosh, Prison Fellowship. What you're doing with the pardons and commutations is unique, your focus on that. So what advice would you give to the members of the audience here to get more governors involved? Because the way for that to be durable, beyond your terms in governor, is for more people to participate, give each other cover, and to make it part of the practice instead of the hustle when people leave office that it's become in the last 30 years.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think the key is, and I touched on it a little bit, I'll reiterate it and then maybe kind of flesh that out a bit. The key is be bold. The same thing I'm asking of you. The irony is this, it isn't that bold. If it's the right thing to do, it really isn't. It shouldn't take that much courage to do the right thing. It really shouldn't. Sadly, sometimes it does. But here's what I would say. I think the key is to be very thorough. This is the greatest power that a governor has. It is. It just is, literally. There's a lot that a governor can do, and a bully pulpit that is afforded to someone in this position. But the ability to truly change a person's life. I am very thorough and thoughtful. I have a stack of other ones that I have yet to go through. I do have a lot on my plate, clearly. The idea of waiting till the end, you couldn't possibly be thoughtful about going through these in a good way if you try to let them pile up. It takes a long time. I look at everything in the file. I start with the letter the individual writes themselves and what case they make for themselves. And then I look at every single thing that they did prior to being incarcerated with the offense that has caused them to need a pardon or request a pardon. And then I look at everything that they've done since then. These things inform me. And this may sound crazy, but there are people who maybe have done nothing that would be pardonable, needing a pardon. But a person who has been nonstop in trouble with the law on seemingly nickel-ante things, including even just running red lights and things of this sort, if they've been a nonstop breaker of the law since they got out, that speaks volumes to me. But the people who truly are worthy of redemption and worthy of a second chance, I think, are deserving of the attention of a governor and of a president, at that level. And so to that end, what I would say, I would encourage other governors, take this seriously. It is the greatest responsibility and an authority that you have. And to take it seriously, and don't be worried about the political ramifications, and don't look at this for some political reason either as it relates to paying back somebody's friends and all this. That's everything that it should not be. And the Mark Riches of the world and if you don't know who that is, Google it up. Those are the people. It should not be done for reasons like that. It just shouldn't. It should be for people for whom this offers them another opportunity to redeem their lives and to do great things. And history is replete with men and women who have done it with or without a pardon. How much more powerful. This young man who I was speaking about, I don't want to get overly specific, but he's in his 30s, he's married, he has children. What he's done as a volunteer, what he's done to use a situation where he intervened, in a situation that caused him to be involved in something, defending another person that was never intending to be. I mean, these are the kind of things that it has affected his life in a powerfully negative way, and yet he's risen above that and done powerful things for many years. And those are the kind of things that speak to me and I think should speak to any governor. So what I would encourage every governor to do, and frankly legislators as well, you have the ear of people, bring it up. Be topical. Those of you that have foundations that make donations to people, you bring it up. Trust me, sadly, I've come to realize that a lot of people in the world of politics are amazingly moved by money. And I know it's a shocker, but it's sad. So if you're a foundation and you write checks to people, demand this. Say, why are we waiting? Because it requires a thoughtfulness. And the last thing I'll say, which is what I said, is it takes more than one person. I don't have time, nor could I do it justice to read through. You want legal minds. You want thoughtful people to have, with strict criteria, read through all these things and see which ones truly qualify. Make sure they truly are eligible and qualify based on whatever your state's requirements are. And then thoughtfully go through this. And I intend to keep doing it for however many years the people of Kentucky afford me that opportunity. So,
Thank you, Governor. Thank you so
Carrie.
much.
Thank you.
Such an amazing.
Thank you.